Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to wait just a couple minutes to get started to let others join, and then we'll begin today's discussion. Thank you all again for being here today. We'll give folks about another 60 seconds and then we'll get started. All right, I think we're ready to get started. Thank you all so much for being here today. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the latest installment of our Homeroom webinar series in partnership with the National Parents Union, Changing the Narrative for Effective Parent and Family Engagement. My name is Michael Sheehy, and I'm a policy analyst on the K-12 team at the Hunt Institute. For those unfamiliar with the Hunt Institute, we were founded by four-term North Carolina Governor Jim Hunt and serve as a resource for policymakers on education issues across the education continuum through in-person and virtual convenings, research, and other forms of technical assistance. Now, before we get into the conversation today, I want to provide a brief logistical overview. We'll start the discussion with about 30 minutes of moderated conversation with our panelists, and then we'll pivot to a Q&A with our audience. If you have any questions throughout the discussion, please feel free to submit them using the Q&A feature on the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we'll do our best to address them during the Q&A portion. We'll also be recording this conversation and in the next couple of days post it on our YouTube channel as well. We also encourage you to join us on Twitter, where you can participate in the conversation using the hashtag #EdHomeroom. And we will also be live tweeting from our Twitter account at HuntK12Ed. So we have a great conversation ahead of us, so let's dive in. Over the past year and a half, parents and families have been more attuned to their child or their children's education than ever before. At the same time, high-profile conversations around hot-button issues like critical race theory, curriculum censorship, and book banning have been dominating the headlines over the past few years. But how do parents and families truly feel? As part of the Hunt Institute's research through the COVID constituency, we found that issues like learning loss, mental health, the digital divide, and developing real-world skills are top issues for parents. And with unprecedented levels of federal funding, policymakers have a real opportunity to give parents a seat at the table and make bold changes to our educational systems. So today we'll be hearing from experts in the field who understand the policy intricacies and current trends around parent and family engagement, and discussing how policymakers can better incorporate parent voices into education decision-making. So let's introduce our panelists. First up, we have Carrie Rodriguez. Carrie is the founding president of National Parents Union and has been considered by many the most successful parent organizer in education advocacy today. At National Parents Union, Carrie has cultivated and leads a network of highly effective organizations and advocates to channel the power of parents into meaningful change for our country's children. Her work, impact, and perspective has been featured in the New York Times, on NBC Nightly News, the Wall Street Journal, CNN, and a plethora of other outlets. Thank you so much for being here today, Carrie. We also have Dr. Jason Glass, the Kentucky Commissioner of Education and Chief Learner. And he represents the public interest in the administration of the Education Department in Kentucky. Commissioner Glass began his career as a teacher in the Hazard Independent School District and has also held key educational leadership positions across the country and has regularly interfaced with and incorporated systems to lift up parent and family voice into his decision-making. Welcome, Commissioner. We also have Tracy Hill. Tracy is the Executive Director of Family and Community Engagement for the Cleveland Metropolitan School District. As Executive Director, Tracy leads work around expanding programs and supports that cultivate district-wide family and community engagement, including expanding the capacity of schools to partner with families and community organizations. In 2014, Tracy was recognized as one of 16 leaders to learn from by Education Week magazine and participated in the White House Symposium on Transformative Family Engagement. And finally, last but not least, we have Dr. Eyal Bergman, Senior Vice President at Learning Heroes. As part of his work at Learning Heroes, Dr. Bergman leads efforts to support schools, districts, and others wanting to build their capacity for more meaningful partnerships with families, and he has previously served as the founder of the Family and Community Engagement Office in the Cajon Valley Union School District in California. So thank you all so much for taking time out of your day to be here today. We're really looking forward to this conversation. And with that said, I think it's time for us to jump in. I think the first question here is going to be for you, Carrie. As the founding president of National Parents Union, you lead a coalition of parent groups and activists committed to improving educational equity and outcomes for students. Now, part of that work involves conducting regular parent surveys to better understand what issues are currently on their minds. Can you tell us more about what you're hearing from parents and how you think parent concerns and priorities have changed since before the pandemic?
Absolutely. My most important title is being Matthew, Miles, David, Max, and Dylan's mama. And so I am very blessed to be able to work with a coalition of other mamas from across the country who are leading movements on the grassroots level, having conversations from the very beginning of the pandemic about what we're concerned about and what the issues are. And frankly, it's been very frustrating to watch the conversation play out where people are speaking for us and not with us and on behalf of us. And so that's why we thought from the very beginning of the pandemic, very important for us to be able to quantify how parents feel with data. And that is why we have conducted more than 25 national surveys with questions that have been cultivated by all of these parent leaders from more than 600 organizations from all 50 states, Washington, D.C., and Puerto Rico about the issues they're seeing in their own neighborhoods and they're facing every single day. So top priority number one, are our kids all right? Whether or not they have the mental health support they need to make sure they can even sit in a classroom, whether or not they can ride the bus, walk down the hallway, be able to sit in a seat, go to the lunchroom, just go back to everyday life. And frankly, that remains a top concern for parents across this country as we watch, our kids continue to struggle with, getting back to a new normal. And so, what we were hoping for is a deeper investment in the ESSER and ARP money that we were seeing and frankly fought to make sure we're going to get down to our local schools just to make sure that these supports were available for our kids. And frankly, what we've seen so far is not adequate. We're also seeing deep concerns amongst parents and families and frankly community as well around whether or not we are addressing learning loss or learning challenges, or the fact that we don't want to just remediate, but actually accelerate the learning that was not adequate even before the pandemic, and whether or not we're addressing this with urgency. So frankly, parents and families and community across this country deeply concerned about the fact that we are kind of in a silly season in talking about issues that have been dominated by 8 to 10% of people who allegedly represent parents, but want to dominate a conversation around CRT, banning books, getting us into a culture war when we have deeply serious work to do to get our kids back on track. So what we are pledging to do and will continue to do and have been doing for the past 2+ years is making sure that we inject the truth, that we inject data, that we bring the real life voices of parents to this conversation. Nobody needs to speak for us. And frankly, we don't need to speak for them either. They can speak for themselves. And that's what we're committed to doing.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Carrie, for that perspective. You're so right how important data is in this decision making, and also designing systems where parents have a seat at the table rather than people speaking on behalf of parents um, to really avoid that disconnect. Thank you so much. Commissioner Glass, this next question is for you. Finding ways to bring parents and families to the table and including them in the process can be a challenging thing to accomplish in practice. Yet you have made concerted efforts in Kentucky to include family voice through your work with the Kentucky Coalition for Advancing Education and the Family Partnership Council. What was the motivation and process for you for implementing these programs? And what are some key outcomes and takeaways you've learned so far?
Thanks for the question, Michael, and I appreciate the Hunt Institute having this event and inviting me to be part of it. I do want to echo some of the things that we heard Carrie talk about, and the disconnect from a policy standpoint from what we see are oftentimes our legislators, well-intended as they may be, focused on cultural issues or national hyperpartisan issues in education that are really disconnected from the challenges teachers and parents and children in schools are seeing right now. We have come through arguably the most disruptive two-year period of learning in any of our history. And to have the focus not be on that and how we recover and accelerate out of that, to me is baffling. And we need to keep the focus on the kids and the learning. So I completely applaud and support what Carrie's talking about with that. When we look at our experience in Kentucky, there has been a long tradition of parent engagement and parent power efforts, parent outreach efforts in the state of Kentucky before I came to this role as commissioner. I've been in the commissioner here in Kentucky for just about 2 years now. The department had a parent partnership council that existed before, but one of the things that we observed when I came in is that the department was really the one setting the agenda. We were doing most of the talking, and I really felt like the purpose of that advisory is to be advised, to hear from parents across our state around what their priorities were, what they wanted us as a state agency to be focused on, and what policy priorities they wanted us to be pushing for at the state level. So we changed the structure of that and really empowered the members of that partnership council to set their own agenda, to tell us what they wanted to talk about. And then it was our responsibility when they needed for us to bring in people with the expertise into the conversation, or to stand back and listen when they had something that they felt like they wanted to tell us. So we really changed the power structure within that organization to let them decide what they needed to tell us and what the perspectives of parents were. Building on that, when I came into Kentucky as commissioner, we didn't come in with some kind of vision or new direction that I was just writing in isolation and dropping onto the state of Kentucky. We really felt like it was important for us to hear from Kentuckians what were the things that they wanted for the future of their children, for their community, and for the future of our public schools in the Commonwealth. And so rather than a vision document being directed by me or by the governor or by the legislature or either political party or members of the state board, we really said we want to hear from Kentuckians what their perspectives were. So we had extensive listening tours across the state. We actually had students facilitate those. We used what we called empathy interview questions, where we asked people to tell stories about their experiences, both positive and negative, rather than ask their positions on policy questions that may have been technical or jargony in nature. We just wanted to hear about their experiences and stories. So we had effectively over 1,000 interviews that we conducted with people all across the state of Kentucky. We pulled together another group of Kentuckians to evaluate that, and we called that the Coalition for Advancing Education. Now that group, we intentionally made it up of the usual suspects, the sort of power players who are always at the table, so they were there. We also opened it up to individuals who wanted to be part of this. So we took volunteers, and then we said, who's missing? whose voice is not at the table, and tried to think about individuals, groups, perspectives that haven't always been at the seat of power or at the table of power when decisions were made around education. We intentionally added them in and recruited people, parents, community members, teachers, administrators from different backgrounds and different communities that hadn't been represented historically. So that really made a much more diverse group of voices that were analyzing this data than we would have had if we had just done it internally at the department. They published a report called United We Learn that went through categorizing the current state of education in Kentucky and a desired future state. So where we are now and where we'd like to be. And that really forms the basis of our strategic plan and direction in Kentucky. And I think it's powerful because it's what Kentuckians told us they wanted for the future of their schools when we took the time to listen. And when we took the time to listen, they had a lot to say. Very quickly, I'll tell you that the three big priorities were: first, deepen and enrich the learning experiences for students. The world has changed dramatically from a sit and get content focused education. Our students need deeper, richer learning experiences. So Kentuckians called on us to create those for our kids. Second, they told us to bring innovation, particularly around assessment and accountability, that there was a real sense that the system of standardized measures that we had in place in Kentucky and around the country was a barrier to the kind of deep learning experiences that they wanted to see kids have. And finally, and I think this maybe goes most directly to the conversation we're having right now, they told us to continue reaching out and involving the voices of parents and students and people in community who haven't always been at the table when educational decisions were made. So those are the three marching orders that I take away: deepen the learning experiences for students, bring innovation when it comes to education, particularly around assessment and accountability, and keep involving parents and community members and students in ways that we haven't in the past.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Glass. As a native Kentuckian myself, it's really exciting to hear about the innovative things that are happening in Kentucky, particularly from the state agency side, and really hearing how when parents and families have a seat at that table, we're able to really cut through the noise and figure out what their concerns are, as opposed to these more highly publicized issues that really dominate the airwaves. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Tracy, this next question is going to be for you. Cleveland Metropolitan Schools runs a variety of innovative programs like Parent University and the Parent Ambassadors program as part of its family engagement strategies. Through this work, what best practices has CMSD developed for reaching parents in a way that is both accessible and equitable?
Well, again, I want to just thank you all for having me be a part of this conversation. Commissioner Glass, our hearts, our thoughts and prayers go out to the people of Kentucky with the challenges that you've had recently with flooding and tornadoes and all of that other stuff. So just to get started, Cleveland has been committed for a long time to family engagement, effective practices, authentic and meaningful practices. I'm in my 12th year as the executive director of the Family and Community Engagement Department, but our department has existed in our district for over 30 years. So there has been a long commitment to making sure that we are creating those family school partnerships which support school improvement and student success. As you indicated, we do have a variety of different programs like our Parent University program, which we actually offer a variety of workshops and capacity building experiences for our parents, but they aren't chosen by us. We actually do survey our parents and do interest surveys to find out what are the topics, what are the resources, what are the learnings that they would like to have, because while we have professional learning for our educators to support meaningful engagement, we can't have a lopsided house. We do use the dual capacity framework for family school partnerships that was developed by Dr. Karen Mapp, and provide professional learning not only for our leaders and our educators, but also for our parents and caregivers. In the last couple of years, we actually instituted a program called Parent Ambassadors. And these are parents at our schools. Each school has a parent ambassador, and they have to have a child in the school. And they are like the welcome wagon. They are the ears that you know, they listen to the voices of the parents in their schools, and provide them you know, recommendations on how they can advocate for their child, how they can partner with their teachers, what their children should be learning, talking about our strategies for social emotional learning. So it's really being thoughtful about, you know, having the mechanisms by which we can support these family school partnerships. And so that we're not doing, as Carrie said, we're not doing things to people or for people. We are working with our parents, because our parents, even though we are one of the poorest school districts with the highest level of childhood poverty, the 9th most segregated city in America, and 14th worst for internet connectivity, our parents have value. They have strengths that we can build on, and moving from the deficit-based approach to family engagement to really acknowledging that our families have funds of knowledge, and they have something to bring to the table as we talk about ways that we can improve our district. Our district has adopted an academic learning vision with the goal of becoming a more fair, just, and good system. And we can't do that without parent voices. So our parent ambassadors create peer-to-peer networks. We know that oftentimes parents feel more comfortable talking to another parent about their experiences and getting, you know, advice and recommendations and suggestions from them, so that in eliciting parents as part of our toolkit, as part of that wheel, as part of the strategy for engaging parents is the work that we are endeavoring to do. We also make sure that when we do have parent meetings, like with our district parent advisory committee that does meet with our CEO, Eric Gordon, and other chiefs, that we provide language transition. So we are allowing access and information to all of our parents and taking in consideration all of the barriers that might preclude them from participating, transportation, childcare, so that they can be engaged and be a part of our school improvement, of district improvement. And then our parents also have a seat at the table at the schools on the school-based parent advisory committees. And they also are representatives when our schools do their school improvement plans. We call them academic achievement plans, that they are a part of that planning team and looking at ways that parents can be engaged in improving the culture of their schools, so that, you know, one of the things we have to acknowledge is that, as you said, Commissioner, the last 2.5 years have been atrocious. We have dealt with a lot of trauma, a lot of pain, a lot of loss, not just our families, but our educators as well. So making sure that we are attending to the emotional and emotional well-being of not only our educators, but our families and our scholars, so that we can't have learning if people are fearful. We can't have learning if students don't feel comfortable at school. We can't have engagement with our parents if our school climates are not are toxic or not welcoming. So we have a very intentional focus on creating more inclusive schools, more welcoming schools, and improving school culture.
Thank you so much, Tracy. How inspiring to see the work you all are doing in Cleveland, and how important it is. Really what struck with me is Cleveland's work in making sure that you all are designing systems where all parents have the capacity to be involved in their child's education, not just parents who have historically been served by the system or have the resources to be involved. It's really inspiring work. The last question I have is for Dr. Bergman before I offer a question to all 4 of our panelists. Dr. Bergman, Learning Heroes also conducts research and surveys to capture parent perspectives on a variety of educational issues. What are the biggest concerns that Learning Heroes is hearing from parents and families right now? And what are some notable findings that education leaders and policymakers should be thinking about and take away from those findings?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me, Michael. And it's really a pleasure to be on a panel with Tracy and Carrie and Commissioner Glass, some of the real leaders in the field of family engagement. So it's really a privilege and an honor to be with you. Similarly to what we heard from Carrie, we have been conducting our nationally representative surveys of parents, teachers, and principals for 8 years now. And consistently, what we hear from parents is that their top concerns are about their child's happiness and well-being, their child's safety. And this year, given the hyper-politicization of family engagement in schools, we also tucked in a question around politicians making decisions about what students learn in the classroom. And I will say that, to my surprise, that actually rose to the #1 concern amongst parents. It was the #1 concern amongst Black parents, amongst Hispanic parents, amongst white parents, across the board. It was higher than being able to finance your child's college, being on track academically, contracting COVID in your family. There's about 15 issues that were included in the battery, and that came up as the #1 concern. And it interestingly really contrasts with the percentage of parents that said that they're doing something to advocate in at their school board or in other ways. So only 12% of parents, for instance, said that they requested that their children be excused from assignments this year. And there are similar ratings of parents voicing concerns who said that they voiced concerns at school board meetings or providing feedback at assigned reading materials. So this, to us, provides some evidence of what a lot of us have been feeling, that it's a very small local vocal minority that is causing a lot of noise, but that actually that's not what parents actually want, is for politicians to stay out of the decision-making of what happens between teachers, students, and parents. We also wanted to, given this moment, we also wanted to do some message testing around the term equity. And so when we asked parents whether they agree or disagree with the statement that equity is essential to student success, we see that 76% of parents agreed, 81% of teachers. So that's already a pretty high number. And then when we offered a definition, which is that every student gets individually what they need to thrive, that number jumps up to 88%. And that cuts across race, that cuts across political affiliation. In other words, equity, the term equity polls well with parents and with teachers. And interestingly, about 8 in 10 parents agree that more support is needed to help staff members identify and address biases they may have when trying to communicate with parents and families. So it's not like there's this dirty word around equity or this dirty word around bias. People see it, people feel it, and they think it's worth working on. And then the other piece of data that I'll mention from our survey, we've been conducting our surveys, as I mentioned, every year. It's a longitude. So we've seen some trends. And one trend that we see very consistently year after year is that a staggering 90+% of parents in America, regardless of race, regardless of ethnic background, regardless of geography, think that their child is at or above grade level in reading and in math, when we know the numbers are much lower than that. 59% of teachers think that most students will show up for grade level work this year. So there's a real disconnect in between what parents know and what teachers know around how kids are doing in school. And so we want to know why that is. Parents largely rely on report cards for whether their child is on grade level, when teachers and educators know pretty well that report cards are more of an indication of effort and assignment completion and not grade level performance. So they're not getting the right information. So one thing we did this year in our survey is we offered parents a scenario. We said, so when we showed them that their child is getting a B in math, what percentage think that their kids are on grade level? And then we said, if your child also at the year-end state results indicated that they were below grade level in math, and that there were other formative assessments that were provided throughout the year, the 8% number that think that their kids are below grade level jumps up to over 50%, 51%. So that's a big difference. So in other words, we're just not sharing the right data with parents. They're just not aware. There's a big disconnect. And what they really want is to work collaboratively with their teachers and with educators. So parents, the percentage of parents that said that it'll be essential for families and teachers to work closely together is 89%, and to trust each other is 84%. So that's why for us, the answer is hidden in plain sight. Those of us who have been educators, we understand that you can't get around the importance of trust and building relationships. This is a relational field. This is relational work. The relationships you build with your students pay off. And so the relationships that we build with families pays off in stronger, deeper partnerships committed to student learning. That's what we see in our data.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bergman, really speaking to that investment. And really what I've heard from all four of our panelists thus far is that really by investing in this work and listening to parents, that disconnect between what parents are actually concerned about and looking for out of their children's education is oftentimes very different from what is being publicly pushed out on the airwaves. So as we've discussed so far, if we want to cut through those headlines and truly understand those parent concerns, education leaders and policymakers really need to be proactive and consistent with amplifying parent voice in the decision-making process. Fortunately, states and districts are thinking through what that could look like. But we don't really want to lose the momentum post-COVID. So from your perspective, how do you foresee the future of parent engagement at the in policymaking at the state, district, or even school levels, kind of in this quote post-COVID world? And I will pass to Commissioner Glass.
Thanks, Michael. I think you've asked a question about, we have this movement around parent power and a real desire for greater parent engagement. And how do we translate that into reality? The conversations that are happening nationally in the partisan and political sphere around parent power, I think can make school leaders hesitant to engage. And that's the exact opposite of what I think we need to do. We do need to put in place some safeguards to make sure that a small minority viewpoint isn't disrupting decisions that are made through democratic process. The decisions that elected school boards make, that their appointed superintendents make. In some cases, it may be under a district that's under mayoral control, or a charter school that's under control of its own board. Those are all intentionally created democratic processes and transparent processes to arrive at decisions. And so you don't want to create situations where you give someone the ability that really has a minority viewpoint to wreck that process. At the same time, we need to make sure that we're creating real opportunities to engage. And so I think that looks like, both at the state and at the district and at the school level, education leaders intentionally creating opportunities for parents to come together, wrestle with the difficult issues that schools have and that parents and families have and that students have. Let's get real about the problems and the challenges that we have. Create opportunities where all viewpoints can be heard and consider, facilitate ways for people with different perspectives to talk to and understand each other. And I think usually when we intentionally facilitate and create those kinds of dialogues, people find out they have a lot more in common than maybe they thought they did. And there's a lot more that they can agree on and work together on than they thought they did. So I just really think that moving this out of a political conversation and more into a community conversation is the right approach. And we have to think about how we can scale that from the state to the district to the school and back and forth. Oh, muted, Michael. There you go.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Glass, the joys of Zoom. Carrie, I would love to pose the same question to you as well.
Well, I think the mood of parents right now is the willingness to move from having transactional relationships to transformational relationships. But honestly, often when I'm asked this question, I feel like I'm giving folks human being lessons. If you want to build trust with parents, you got to do things that are worthy of trust. You got to be trustworthy. So if you want to go on a listening tour, you got to actually listen. Okay, you can't just show up with an agenda that's pre-created about what you want to talk about, and these are the parameters of the conversation and the only things that we're going to discuss, and not allow the people you're talking with to bring their concerns to the table. We see that quite often. And that's what makes me a little nervous sometimes about, and no disrespect to Tracy whatsoever, but parent ambassadors and sometimes parent universities, because these are created by the system and don't always leave room for parents, families, and communities to bring what their concerns are to the table. So when we're creating transformational spaces for parents, it allows for parents to actually bring up what their concerns are and gives the opportunity for the system, the leaders, educators to have courageous conversations, because that is what this moment calls for. There are some really difficult conversations that we need to have. The parents that you see today are often the underserved kids of the last generation. Like, we've gone through it, we have the lived experience, we've sat in the same seats, sometimes been taught by the same teachers, and not a lot has changed. There hasn't been a lot of restorative justice with us as a community, yet we're expected to just show up, all smiles and rainbows and want to re-engage with people who often were, ones who put us through deep trauma and abuse in some places. So I think there needs to be acknowledgement of those things. I think there needs to be space created for parents and families to be able to bring up what their concerns are and to have those courageous conversations. And frankly, because we saw this catastrophic disruption occurring in our living rooms, and we have a vested interest in the success of the system. I have 5 children in America's public education systems. This thing better work. I want to work to make it happen. I'm not here to completely dismantle and disrupt it, but we've got to change because we're not seeing enough of that urgency there. So I'm willing to do it. I know the folks that I represent are willing to have those conversations, but we cannot just kind of ooze back into that status quo around parent engagement where we're just going to put you back in this box, allow you to weigh in on the things that we think it's appropriate for parents and families to weigh in on, and things that you want to bring up. Well, we're going to table that for another time where we're not, we're not really discussing it in public, or we're trying to quiet it down. If you want to do things that are worthy of trust, you've got to be trustworthy. You've got to show up and be authentic in those conversations and be humble enough to say, this is a moment where we can really rebuild in a way that transforms the system to make it more inclusive, and start actually, instead of just talking the talk, start walking the walk.
Thank you so much, Carrie. Tracy, I would love to hear your thoughts as well.
Yeah, Carrie, I totally agree with you that it should not be a set agenda, that the parent voices have to be elevated in their concerns. And what we know is that we can't go back to what was normal pre-COVID. It wasn't working in many instances for many families. So yes, we have to have those honest and open and transparent conversations about what wasn't working. So that's why it's very important, as I said, that we do have parents at the table, not only on the advisory committees at our school, but our district level advisory committee. And that agenda is not set by me, it's set by the parents. We ask them a problem of practice. What are their concerns? We bring it to the table. We sit down. They chart out things. They provide recommendations and strategies. So it's, again, not doing 2 or 4, but definitely with. We're not perfect, and we have a long way to go, and we acknowledge that. In terms of policy, for local and state and national, our district actually does have a policy liaison that stays abreast of local, state, and national issues, and oftentimes brings those things up and shares them with our parents, and helps them understand how their voices can be heard, how they can advocate at the local, state, and federal level. We do a lot of voter registration drives, have buses that take, work with our churches, our community partners to make sure that our parents are out there and understanding the issues and lifting their voices through votes. But then also just recognizing that, again, we can't go back to what was. I mean, we have to acknowledge all of the things that are happening in our nation right now, especially around racial injustice and racial inequity, and grappling with that in our district as well. We have a district that is predominantly African-American and a workforce that is predominantly not African-American. So we have been working on issues of equity and inclusion for the last 5 years, doing training with our staff, and just really grappling with those issues. You can't brush things under the carpet because it makes the carpet lumpy and people will trip and fall because you're trying to hide it. And again, we can't go back to what was before. We have to transform our educational systems, especially when we're looking at our large urban districts with many of the issues that we have in terms of providing equitable education to all of our students, all of our scholars, and working hand in hand with our parents. And that's why it's so important as we talk about dual capacity, that we're building capacity on both sides of the wheelhouse. And who better to do that than parents who can create those peer-to-peer connections and help bring those voices that sometimes are left out to the table and making sure that we're addressing their concerns.
Thank you so much, Tracy. And finally, before we move into the Q&A portion of our session today, I would love to hear your perspective, Dr. Bergman, on this issue.
Yeah, at Learning Heroes, we've laid out our thinking on the path forward. We have a report called Unlocking the How, Designing Family Engagement Strategies that Make an Impact on Student Success. It pulls on our annual research. It also pulls on all the research codified in the dual capacity building framework for family school partnerships. It also pulls on the philosophy that I wrote about with Dr. Karen Mapp in an article called Embracing a New Normal Toward a More Liberatory Approach to Family Engagement, which really takes stock of this era of dual pandemics. And in Unlocking the How, we lay out essentially three pillars. One, there's mountains of evidence that you cannot do family engagement work unless you are deliberately attempting to build or restore trust with families. You can't build a cake without flour, and you can't do family engagement without trust. There's no way around it. And a lot of places are trying to sweep it under the rug, to keep going with Tracy's metaphor. And in my experience, what works the most for actually building and restoring trust, especially in communities where there has been histories of mistrust, is getting to a point that I heard Commissioner Glass mentioning earlier, which is around being cognizant about issues of power. Who gets to set the agenda? Who gets to decide where the meetings happen? When families are uncomfortable in the school, but the only place we meet with them is in the school building, then that places a burden on families to go out of their comfort zone to meet with us. Why don't we shift the burden of discomfort and ask our families or ask our educators to go into the community? It's not scary. You just have to go be yourself and go talk to people, like real people, the way Carrie is talking about. So if we're cognizant and we shift some of those power imbalances, it's not like educators are going into being a teacher or going into being a principal because they want to have more power than parents. It's not why people go into it. But an important part of equity work is disentangling our intent from our impact. And so if we are having these power imbalances and these power differentials, then let's be aware of how that might impact our ability to demonstrate trustworthiness. The second pillar is, let's please anchor our family engagement strategies in student learning and well-being. That is what parents want from us. That is what we are. We are educators. A lot of family engagement, quite frankly, is kind of fluff in schools and districts. If we care about what we're all here for as kids, so let's focus on what actually matters, which is student learning and well-being. Build the trust, because family engagement is not an end in and of itself. It is a means towards better, improved outcomes for kids. So if we focus on student learning, that will help focus us in the right direction. And the third is to build an infrastructure for this work, to build systems and structures inside of our school districts, our LEAs, our SEAs, because when we start to take a step back, we really see that most schools and school systems are not designed for these kinds of partnerships. True, authentic, two-way, solidarity-driven, equity-focused family engagement strategies. So in many ways, most educators, they probably haven't even seen what this looks like. They don't necessarily have a mental model or a schema built for what this can look like. So we have to redesign the systems with a learning orientation for adults that work in schools. So what are some ways that we do? We already do that in schools in a lot of ways. Most educators don't know that their state has standards for family engagement. Most states have standards for family engagement. If you don't know what they are, you can go ahead and at least define in your school, like, what does success look like? Who's responsible for family engagement in our school? It should not just be the parent liaison. Teachers know the students best. They need to be in touch with families. What does improvement look like? Allocate time. I hear a lot about like school districts, the teachers unions are a problem, or it's really hard to find the time. Well, there are school districts out there that have put home visits or deliberate time for relationship building with families into their teachers' contracts. That can happen. There's a lot of really creative ways that you can make sure that educators do have the time, and that we support staff training so that the work isn't just family facing. The parent liaisons, the parent university, I have created those programs. Those are important family facing initiatives, but as a whole, they're incomplete because we're not focusing also on building the capacity of educators. So we need to build the capacity of educators. And I'd say that probably the one single most important thing that systems leaders or school leaders can do to elevate this work is to bring it to the C-suite. You can tell me that family engagement matters, but I'll make my decision based on your org chart and based on your budget. There are districts around the country, I'm thinking of Richmond and Baltimore and Boston, and there's a lot of districts where the senior leader for family engagement, who is solely dedicated to family engagement, is on the district cabinet. And so that's how we can elevate this work, and we can actually start to build that infrastructure that leads to deeper trust and a focus on student learning.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bergman, and thank you all four of our panelists for such an insightful discussion so far. We are going to now move to the Q&A portion with our remaining time, which I fully acknowledge is we're coming down to the wire. So I would love to get in as many questions as we possibly can in our remaining time here. We've already had several questions come into the chat. The first question is for you, Tracy. Could you tell us a little bit more about the specific goals and actions for the Parents Academy, and particularly how is that work supported in Cleveland? Oh, I think you're muted, Tracy.
I thought I clicked on that little microphone. So basically what we've done is created learning strands. So parents as teachers, parents as advocates, parents as learners, parents as did I say advocates and leaders. And we have worked to create like a catalog of different course offerings. And basically what we do is we share it with the schools. Our schools are required to have a family engagement committee with parents on the committee to decide what types of activities and programs they want at their schools. And they get to select what parent university workshops they want. We don't do it as a district, like when we did it as a district, you'd have a handful of parents coming. So we moved that decision in terms of what the parents wanted in terms of the types of offerings into the schools, into the hands of parents to decide what types of offerings they wanted and to work with their schools to schedule those parent university offerings at their schools. What was the second part of your question? I'm sorry.
Oh, it was how is the work, how is like your parents' university work supported in?
Yeah. So it is, like I said, supported financially through our Title I Family Engagement allocation. That's how we support it. But I just explained to you how it is actually instituted at the school level. So it's not the district telling the schools, here's what you're going to offer. We send out an RFP to different organizations and workshop providers. We vet them through a process, and then we compile them into a workshop catalog, send them to the schools. Parents get to select what they want. The other thing, to Dr. Bergman's point, is that we actually took the last 2 years to develop a set of engagement standards for our district. And this was a joint effort with parents, members of our leaders from our teachers union, members from our principals. They don't have a union, but their organization, bus drivers, secretaries. We had a variety of different stakeholders at the table. And we had a year-long process of monthly meetings and focus groups to actually develop engagement standards for our district.
Thank you so much, Tracy. Moving the conversation forward a little bit, This next question, we've gotten multiple questions come in, and I would love to hear particularly your perspective, Carrie and Commissioner Glass. When we're communicating with these groups or working to incorporate parent voice into our decision making, how can organizations and state agencies intentionally inform and include the voices of parents and caregivers who may not speak English or may not write English, or English is not their primary language? And I'll yield the floor to you first, Carrie.
Happy to jump right into this. This is top of mind for us. The National Parents Union is actually an affiliate of Unidos US. Those parents who do not speak English as their primary language are not an afterthought to us. They are us, we are them. They are intentionally at our top priority. Many of us have fought the fight at the local level. Here in Massachusetts, I have fought over 181 individual school districts with the Department of Justice around translation and interpretation issues and federal violations of not being able to provide parents with interpretation and translation in IEP meetings. So their priorities are top of mind for us, and they are always first at the table. And when we created the National Parents Union, we were incredibly intentional about taking a look at the traditionally represented voices of parents and who is often pushed away, disenfranchised, not included to the conversation. So not only are we Latino and Black, African American, are we parents who have been impacted by incarceration, foster parents, grandparents who are raising their grandchildren. We are intentionally representative of modern families in the United States, and are also pushing our schools, our educators, our districts, our policymakers to understand that this 1950s model of what we think an American family is, and trying to, I guess, push that vision and that lens through parent engagement in terms of how we expect parents to show up is just so antiquated and ridiculous. Like, you've got to understand the context of who we are and how families are in 2022. Get with it, folks. You know, like, there's a reason why parents can't show up for your 2:45 meeting for 10 minutes. And if we don't, then suddenly it's an indictment on us and our character and how much we care about our kids. So whether or not we speak English, whether or not we have been impacted by incarceration, what our skin color is, or what the makeup of our family is in our family structure, parents want to be included and are powerful advocates for our kids and need to be included in that conversation. So I guess I'm just going to leave it at that. We were very proud also to be honored in 2022 as the National Advocate of the Year for Unidos US. So we will continue to lead and be the tip of the spear for those parents and make sure they are a primary focus in this conversation.
Thank you so much, Carrie. Commissioner Glass, I would love to hear the state agency perspective.
Yeah, I think, something that came to mind while Carrie was talking, something that we experienced in the course of the pandemic that I think is going to stick with us, that's going to help with some of these challenges, is we relied a lot on virtual meetings and Zoom. And what we found out is, for a lot of parents, that's a lot more convenient than going to the school and standing in the lines and all the disruption associated with transportation and childcare for the 10-minute meeting. So I think that's something that that we'll see continue forward. Certainly the in-person meetings have returned. Those are valuable, but we also can shift to virtual meetings if that's more convenient to the parent. More specific to the question that you raised, Michael, I was superintendent of 2 districts in Colorado. One of them, half of the kids in the district were white, English speaking, and the other half were Hispanic and Spanish speaking. And so this building capacity around translation into both English and Spanish for everything was a real necessity. It took us some time to build the staff, to invest from the district's perspective into building the staff to where we could do everything in both languages all the time. But if you look at the communications that come out of Eagle County schools now, that's what you'll see, is that they've built the capacity to make sure that they're reaching all of those populations. In the second district where I was superintendent, it was Jeffco Public Schools, which is in the western suburbs of the Denver metro area. And I see some of my Jeffco friends on here. Hello, much love to Jeffco for all of you that are here. That district had a much more diverse array of different languages and people and perspectives in it. It already had started to develop some of that capacity, but in my time there, and I see it continuing even forward, we worked to add even more translators and start reaching out and identifying contractors who could help with that in some of the languages that the district didn't have a translator for. So there was a large Russian population, large Spanish-speaking population. We had lots of Hmong speaking families. So you had to find ways to reach all those families. And Carrie's absolutely right. You got to make, if you want them to be engaged in IEP meetings and parent meetings with teachers, you have to provide these services and make them available and let the parents know that they can count on that being there so that they trust that the district is going to provide those. At the Kentucky Department of Education, we've also started taking steps in this direction as well. Of course, our agency compared to what's in a large school district is much smaller in terms of its capacity, but we actually have partnered with Jefferson County Schools in Kentucky, which is the Louisville metro area. So it's a large district, almost 100,000 students. They have a lot of languages they support. They have a lot of diversity. And so really they have a lot more capacity to do this work than we had at the department. So we've used some of our COVID relief monies to send to Jefferson County to establish using their capacity to help us with these translations. I don't know what we're going to do when the money runs out, but we'll have to figure out that problem. It's a good problem to have. We got to think about how we can make sure we're reaching these parents even beyond 2024 when these COVID relief funds are gone.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Glass. And I think we have time for one more question that I would love to hear Dr. Bergman's perspective on. While states collect and distribute data on schools and districts to varying degrees, that information is often hard to understand and comb through for the general public. Mm-hmm. How can state agencies or organizations that work with parents and families work to better collect, communicate, and distribute education data to these stakeholder groups?
Yeah, it's a really important question. This is actually something that my organization, that we partner with SEAs to support them on this body of works to make it more parent friendly. There's a scholar at Harvard who studies the art of communicating with busy people. His name is Dr. Todd Rogers, and he's fond of saying, write as if you intend to be understood. And sometimes in education, sometimes we just lose sight of that. He has this study where when families get a chronic absenteeism notification to their home, and there's about 2 pages of 6-point legal font about why they might be in trouble, like, do we really expect that that's what we want to be receiving? He did this study where he was able to show that if you used a letter similar to like the utility usage, where you could see very clearly in colors, very simple, very easy to understand language, your child has been absent 8 days so far this year. The average student has been absent 2 days this year. That has a real impact. People, oh, I didn't realize that this was actually a problem. So I think we need to just try to keep it simple. Let's try to use multiple measures and not just boil a child. Like when they just get something from the state and it just says your student didn't pass the test. Is that all I'm being told right now? Like, how about I get a little bit more information about what that consists of? Like, there are communications tools and even some marketing tools around how you send materials and messages home that actually are interesting, that are captivating, that are more easily understood, and that are less about an ed code or a legal requirement. And the other thing that I'll mention is just try to use text messaging as much as possible, because honestly, that's what most parents prefer anyway. And if you can do an opt-out version where parents can opt out of a text message, that's much better than an opt-in version, because we just see much higher usage rates. So that's just a couple ideas.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bergman. And I know we're running short on time, but I really want to thank you, Commissioner Glass, you, Dr. Bergman, Carrie, and Tracy for joining us for today's conversation. I know I personally have learned so much, and I really hope our attendees have learned a lot as well. Now, before we close today's discussion, I do want to turn everyone to our upcoming K through 12 webinars. We'll continue to update you all on what we're hearing from parents and the public with updated results from our nationwide survey in October. So please register for that if you are interested. And then after that conversation, we will also be having upcoming webinars on Tuesday, September 27th at 2 p.m. where we will be discussing the role of teacher diversity in decriminalizing Latinx girls. And then 2 days later, we will be discussing on Thursday, September 29th, the role of collective impact and how it can be utilized to re-engage students and improve outcomes. We also encourage you to join us for our other upcoming K through 12 webinars listed on the screen, and you can register for these discussions by going to our website, which we will post in the chat. So again, thank you all so much for joining us today, and we really hope to see you again soon. And thank you to our panelists once again. Thank you so much.